Today with you in the studio, I'm going to be the host, and my name is Felix Kapuma from ACFIM. Before we get it started, allow me to invite everybody to join this discussion, be part of this conversation on all our social media platforms that will be flashed on the screen. Our Twitter handle at ACFIM, our YouTube account, hit that like button so that you can be able to get the notifications every time we have a similar event. But it's a very good afternoon, a very good morning, a very good evening, wherever you are, and welcome to Money in Politics webinar series edition number 2. With me in the studios or on the set, I am joined by 4 very interesting set of panelists from different backgrounds. Some are practicing politicians, some have been politicians before. We have academicians, and we also have activists. And this mix is indeed going to help us demystify and understand what is it really and what it means when we talk about money controlling voter consent. And allow me to do the introductions and the honors, and I'll start with Professor Mwambusa Ndebesa. Professor Mwambusa Ndebesa is no stranger in such spaces, and if you see him for the first time, probably you are just either you've just come to Uganda or just been born yesterday. But he is a don at Makerere University College of Humanities and Social Sciences. He teaches history and he is an alumni with Museveni, the president of Uganda, at Dar es Salaam University. I remember Professor defending the president when his university credentials were being questioned, I think, by Matembe, and came out to prove that, yes, our president did go through university. Professor Mwambusa is also an activist and is one of the few academics whose voice still cries out in the wilderness. Whereas many of our colleagues seem to be going silent, he's never shy to talk about social injustice. He is also a public intellectual who actively contributes to public debates through media, commentaries, and seminars, among others. He also contributes, I've seen him write a couple of articles in the dailies. So it's good to have you, Professor Mwambusa Ndebesa. Good to have you, and you are most welcome to this edition of webinar series on money in politics. The next panelist that I should introduce is also academician, and it allow me to introduce Dr. Emily Comfort. You help me pronounce this name, Marakso. I hope I'm right. Marakso. He's a researcher, he's a policy analyst, he's a journalist, and a media studies scholar. She's currently the director of Africa Policy Center at Uganda Christian University, which is a think tank that brings together research, policy, and practice on a variety of issues in Africa. She's a senior lecturer at the Faculty of Journalism, Media and Communication at UCU. She has taught extensively in that area on development policy, development economics, and development management, both at Makerere University and UCU for over a decade, and holds a doctorate in communications and media studies from KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa. She's also a writer and a columnist in the Monitor newspaper on the subject of gender and social justice in public policy. She has published a number of academic articles, and good really to have you on stage. You are most welcome, Dr. Emily Comfort.
Thank you.
My next panelist is also someone many of you know is always in our face on the set, TV sets, on radio, and is the current director of communications with NRM, National Resistance Movement, the biggest party in Uganda. Please let's welcome Emmanuel Rumala-Dombo. It's today that I actually get to know your third name. Interesting. Your middle name, Rumala, is quite interesting. is also, he has a very interesting, I would say, CV. He is a former MP for Bunyole County East on NRM ticket in the 9th Parliament, but served in the 6th Parliament. I think every Ugandan still remembers the 6th Parliament. For the reason we all know, served in the 7th Parliament and also served in the 8th Parliament. If my history serves me right, Emmanuel Dombo was the chief petitioner in the censure motion of Minister Sam's case. I think that was the 6th Parliament. And I think, I'm so sure since then you've made up. He's also the founding chair of the Parliamentary Advocacy Forum, PAFO, which later became Reform Agenda and subsequently FDC. But along the way, I think he switched camp. He's also the former guild president for Makerere University. You are most welcome, Emmanuel.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure for me to be one of the panelists. And good afternoon to the panelists.
Great. Our last panelist is Alex Waiswa Mufumbiro. He's the deputy spokesperson for National Unity Platform. And I remember when he was handed this noble cause, he promised to make the loudest noise that will make the government uncountable. I hope you're making the noise, Alex. Alex, he was formerly in charge of training and capacity building. I think he was handling the elements of patriotism and ideology at NUP. NUP is the second biggest party with numbers in parliament. That's becoming the official opposition space in parliament. NUP is National Unity Platform, and was also, I think, if I remember very well, Alex also at some point had a stint with FDC. Also, before crossing to NUP, also had a stint with BP. You correct my fact, but he also contested for MP for Ginger City West, and I think he didn't make it. But you're most welcome, Alex Waiswa, to this discussion.
Thank you very much. Hope I'm being heard loudly. Thank you very much for the opportunity that I've been given to serve. I was with the FDC at the university time, but not fully as a member, but I was one of those great supporters of change that I've been. I am the former deputy spokesperson of the Democratic Party, but the difference is I have not been crossing like you are saying. With the National Unity Platform, I started, I found it.
Okay, okay.
So the difference that where I am is my deserved home, and I don't intend to leave anymore.
With politics, there are no permanent forms. But
no,
I take your word for that.
This one is more permanent.
All right, all right. Good to have you.
Only time will tell.
Lead. Okay, let's get this started. Professor Ndereso, if you can hear me, I want to bring you in here to help us. When we talk about controlling voter consent, before we even get to the basics of it, can you break it down for a common man? What is voter consent? Can you lay foundation for someone who is a border rider, someone selling in the market? Can you demystify this concept of voter consent? Professor, are you there?
Professor did say that he will join later, that it's raining heavily where he is. He cannot speak.
Okay, and since the honors of demystifying the concept of voter consent, I wanted it to be within for starters, the confines of the academics. I'm handing over that baton to you, Emily, to help us demystify that concept. I'll also bring in my other colleagues, especially those who are practicing politics.
I thank you, Felix. I would have really loved for Professor Ndebesa to break this down because he's my lecturer. He taught me at the university and I would have been happy to hear him. But if you want to break down the idea of voter consent and who controls it, it has to do with the fact that in democratic systems, contestants in an electoral process will normally mobilize voters and get voters to buy into their ideas, or to at least agree with them that they are the right man or woman for the job. And then based on that mobilization skill and whatever else is there, the voter will make that decision on who to vote. And this can happen at the level of parliament when you're sending a representative to parliament, because we are a representative democracy. That means that whoever you elect is the one going to speak for you for all intents and purposes. So the idea is that the contestant will convince the person who votes through vote mobilization processes to vote for them. And the notion of having that voter consent. So the voter gives you their consent by thinking, oh, Felix is a good person. He sounds okay. He sounds like he will represent me well. And so I will vote for him. And that action of voting for Felix is what we know as delivering on your consent. However, when we talk about controlling voter consent, we mean that there are certain factors that actually determine the consent of the voter without their willingness per se, that they would have otherwise voted differently. However, because of that factor, in this case, in our discussion, we are talking about money, the money then becomes the factor, the dominant factor that controls their consent. And one must always remember that there are always a complex interplay of factors in an electoral process. And it's not just about how much money somebody has, but a number of issues that play out ultimately that enable somebody to give their consent to one voter or another. And the key word here being dominant. What is it that might actually influence the decision of the voter more than the other? In theoretical terms, we would say that the voter consent would be determined by the ideas or the manifestos that all these political parties actually work very hard to come up with. And then in a system of competition, the voter will compare the ideas of Mr. Dombo and the ideas of Mr. Kafuma and the ideas of whoever, and make that decision based on what they have had. And that's what makes voter mobilization an important part of an electoral process. But we have seen that different things tend to happen.
Wow, interesting. I'm going to throw in here Emmanuel Dombo, because you have been in politics and you practice politics, and there's this question. Paint for us a typical African voter. Does the typical African voter have free will in choosing political leaders?
Thank you very much. I will specifically give an experience as I've seen it over a period of time. Having contested for elections about 6 times, including both general elections and the party primaries, and having won in all those and lost in one.
Yes.
So I have the experience of winning and losing. And I want to tell you that the biggest challenge, which I want us to debate over time, other than the voter financing and its effect and how it affects the process, is whether democracy works in Africa.
Mm.
This is something that must progressively be taken on with comparative studies to show where democracy has delivered the desired development. And why countries like China, where there is more selection than election, why they have leapfrogged from a very primitive backward societies to being number 2 economies in the world. But that's not for debate today. But I want to contextualize. When we go for elections in Africa and in Uganda, what are we talking about? We are talking about a subsistence population that in many cases is very poor, and people are looking for food, not leaders. Recently, I was in the presidential elections and I went to one of the communities in Uganda and I looked at very hungry communities whose expectations was food, but for us, we're delivering voter materials for them to vote. And I'm sure we left leaving them very disappointed. We're also talking about elections which are going to be conducted by a poorly paid public official, superintended and supervised. We're also working on an environment that has a very opulent mindset, people who are going to want to use money to show their status. And also working in a population that does not care about what happens today, but the population that cares about what happens today without fear, taking note of what happens tomorrow. The elections are talking about the following day. The people who get money and they are talking about today. So how do you promise to find a solution to someone's problems in the future when actually his or her problem are current? Somebody is going to sleep without food. Somebody may want some walagi to drink. And you are talking about building a bridge which many MPs in the past have promised and never delivered. So in the circumstances then, the voter therefore would rather have the current food, the daily food, than actually even thinking or hearing or listening to what you are promising. I'll conclude this initial introduction with these proverbs in Uganda. These proverbs say, "Ekirema sente, owenkata tazinga." Really, whatever defeats money, you cannot come pretending that you are going to lift it using something else. Others say, "Atalina sente tafumita lindazi." You can never pick from the frying pan when you have no money to pay. And what is it that they are picking from the frying pan? It is the leadership, it is the votes, it is the consent to govern. And that is the setting in which we operate. Why we think democracy can work when the expectations of the community at least is food for the day.
Wow. Interesting perspective there. You raised a very, I think it's a critical area of reflection. Elections are talking about the following day, but you have participants whose interests are current needs. Now, how do you reconcile that? I need to, let me bring in here Waiswa. Waiswa, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes, I want to bring you in here. Look, National Unity Platform seems to have, we can take a case study of 2021 elections where somehow I would call you, let me call this, you surprise everybody in an election where everybody was considering NRM to be very dominant. To win certain electoral seats, does that mean that beyond money, there are other factors that could actually control voter consent from the experiences of NUP? Alex?
Hello? Hello?
Yes, I can hear you. Did you get my question?
I got the question, looking at the surprise of NUP and the voter seats. And my brother, I want to tell you that we actually won the election. It is not about the seats. We won the election. It was gigantic. And you see up to date, people are still living with stealing an elephant, but having a polythene bag as its shelter is definitely going to defeat you to keep it. We won the election decisively. And of course, what determined this topic is very important because it talks about the core of democracy. And I have had, rightly so, Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, who is very experienced, by the way, at this, both, as he has said, as a winner and as a loser. And he has given you what the 35 years have delivered in making democracy monetary. It starts with, when you talk about the National Unity Platform, there were a lot of questions where we're going to get the money to run around the country, to mobilize the country. And as you are aware, we were stifled on many occasions from fulfilling this constitutional mandate. But what defeats money is power, is people power. Because this, the element of money must have an element of people. And that is how we managed to demystify this. We had the might of the people. They would give us the free shelter. They would give us the free transport. There are many times we reached petrol stations and people popped up and paid for this fuel. Now that also speaks to the core that in democracy, you need resources. But these resources must be out of the belief of the services you're going to offer. Now, we were able to demystify that because we were the hope. You said you were surprised of our results. In fact, our results were surprised that we did not even score bigger than we scored. You know, there was a policy by the National Resistance Movement to curtail other leaders who had won from other regions, especially at the legislative point, from being declared. And we have many great cases about the same. So the National Unity Platform, was a true reflection of how the power of the people can actually defeat so many other things, including a state that is so hugely resourced, like ours has been, like the state in Uganda has been. I want to tell you that where does this start from? Let me tell you, nominating a member of parliament is 3 million. Nominating a member of parliament is 3 million. And why was this done by the 9th parliament? It was done with bad faith. They woke up in the morning and said, very many people want to stand for MP, therefore let us increase the money where many of them cannot. I think that was 2010. Now that alone is unfair. That one to be a leader, he must have capacity to have 3 million. When you're paying him a salary of 6 million, so it means that the accountability. Yes.
On that one, I want to play the devil's advocate. Isn't it important for us in the principle of protecting the quality of our democracy and politics to put some threshold?
Quality has never been associated with the money, my brother, on human resource.
Okay.
If you service delivery does not have, one must not be meritorious at being a mogul. We are not in democracy and politics. Why it is defined that way is because it is not having one who has the best mind of investment. Here you are investing in serving the people and serving them with with their resources, not your resources. What breeds being the devil's advocate, as you're saying, it means that you are bringing only rich people. And then why do you say that you need educated people if you are wanting rich people? It was wrong it is against all the financial equality systems of countries, and that is where it begins from. A person who has spent over 200 million shillings to win an election will only be part of parliament and wherever he has gone to make deals and recover his money. That is natural instinct. Now, the regime of the Emmanuel Dombos has made it a habit, and you have heard him rightly so. For them, they have put democracy at the level of the Chindazi, that if you do not have money, you don't deserve to serve. But service in the Bible, if you read the story of David, David was the most the most unlucky in the family. He had nothing, but he delivered the greatest service in terms of the biblical teachings. So for me, and again, as Mr. Dombo has said, of course, for him, it is rising from a point of being factual. I stood also in an election, and unlike Dombo, for the legislative part of it, I stood in an election where I discovered that one must have money. I mean, you sit in a meeting, and when you sit in a meeting, after you have spoken a lot of sense, somebody is asking, yes, you have said all that, but how are we going? How are we going to feed ourselves? Therefore, what I discovered in these processes, that even when you announce that you're going to see, to meet the voters, the mentality that has been created around them is that it is you who must give them. Now, Senior Emmanuel Dombo has communicated about the discussion of democracy, whether it can work in Africa, and putting it to China and giving an example of China. But it would be wrong for you to give examples of China in isolation of reality, because China, their existentiality has been on that as a form, and for them, they have been more patriotic to even service delivery of their countries. It has not been about democracy. Here we have had a regime that claims to be brought by democracy for 35 years consistently, but with no fundamental improvement on infrastructure, on education, on health, on financial personal mobilization. So it is more than it. Service delivery is even more than the systems that you adopt. And democracy is the greatest weapon that can defeat corruption, that can defeat anarchy, because democracy defeats anarchy. That is where we must all understand. And that is why it is important that where they are breeding money to determine the side and fate of the money must be there, that we agree. But it must come from the believers. You know, when you are part of the congregation, it would be wrong.
You are raising a very important issue, which I'm going to bring you back on it, of qualifying that, yes, we are not demonizing money, but how do we then control the use of money to usher democracy? But past that point, I'm going to bring you back on it. Don't worry. I want to pass, because Professor is on stage now. Professor Nelson, can you hear us now?
Yes, I can hear you so faintly. What about me?
Yeah, I can hear you very well.
Thank you.
Very loud and clear.
So can I come in?
Yeah, I want to bring you in here. Wife, I'm going to bring you back on that point. Just hold it there. I want to bring you in here, Professor. You, in your absence, your fellow professor labored to demystify voter consent. But as you build on what is shared around voter consent, as you demystify that language to a common person who is listening, not tuning in, also help us understand how eventually now the controlling of voter consent, especially by using money, turning the citizen into an inhabitant in an electoral process.
Thank you very much, and good afternoon, viewers and listeners out there.
Alex, can you mute, please?
Can I
yeah,
speak?
no, sorry. Yes, please.
Can you mute
Yes,
yourself? Thank you. Professor, proceed.
Thank you for inviting me to participate in this important topic. Definitely, it is important. We have had democracy in the marketplace or elections in the marketplace, as Mahmoudane would put it, and it has definitely distorted our politics. The social contract that is between the people and the voters has now turned out to be the commercial contract between the voters and the voted. And definitely, as some people say, that there is economic distortion which should be corrected. There has been political distortion, electoral distortion in Uganda, which is very, very, very unfortunate. For the information of you and the viewers out there and the listeners out there, this phenomenon of commercializing elections was not so common in the 1960s and 1980. It is a new phenomenon. It's a relatively new phenomenon. And we have failed to commercialize agriculture, but we have succeeded in commercializing elections. Maybe we thought that was a substitute. I somehow faintly listened to Emmanuel Dombo. He seemed to be justifying why there should be this monetization and commercialization of elections, that yes, people are poor. It's true, people are poor. And instead of pursuing human rights, they are pursuing survival rights. However, that is not to justify and keep on distorting our elections because people are poor. We should do something about it. And we have failed to do something about it. And everybody knows that elections have been commercialized. That is actually a tired debate. What we should be talking about is how can we minimize this commercializing of elections? Whereas in the Western democracies or functioning democracies or liberal democracies, we have the money is used. Normally that money is actually used in mobilization. It is not used in buying and purchasing a vote. Even that one is not right. But even this one of ours is extremely distorting our elections in Uganda. And as a consequence of this distortion of elections, development is affected, legitimacy of the state is affected, because everyone knows that he purchased a vote and therefore service delivery is not what is important. After all, as long as you have money, you will give out money during elections or use money to mobilize whatever in whatever way, and people will vote you. So you don't have to provide service delivery. Host, can I still be heard? Or there is interruption? Hello?
For me, I can hear.
You can hear me. So I am continuing to say that we need to come up with measures to avoid vote purchasing. First of all, electoral laws must be amended in such a way that anybody who is found by the courts of law to have used the money during elections should be barred from standing again for the next 10 years, including the by-election that is likely to take place. Because hitherto what is happening is that you go and purchase votes and you are found by the courts to have done that, and then you even stand in the by-elections. We need to discourage that one. But most importantly, I think there is need to have public censor. If people can be awakened in such a manner that when you use money, they eat your money, they shun you, and then next time somebody else will not do that one. If they can shun you because you have voted, but that may not be easy, as Emmanuel Dombo pointed out, because some people who have no living wage or they are not surviving, they can easily accept to be bribed. That is why the state should come in. But which state will come in? Because hitherto, even the incumbent government has been kind of giving a nod to commercializing elections, euphemistically saying you are facilitating. That you see, don't pay voters, but you facilitate them. And how do they do it? They can invite you to come for a meeting, and then they say, I think we need to facilitate you by refunding your transport. You have used about 10,000 or 20,000 or 50,000 on transport, and then you are given 500,000, or you are given 1,000,000 shillings as transport allowance, when actually they know that you have used only 50,000. That is bribery. That is indirect bribery. There are very many ways in which we have bribed, and I don't know the way we can stop it is to come up with laws that do not only punish direct
I cannot
payment.
hear.
You cannot hear me now.
There was an interruption, but now I can hear.
Hello?
Professor, we can hear you.
You can now hear. I don't know whether the interruption is from you or from me. I hope we need to bribe this interruption so that it stops interrupting. We facilitate it. That is how they euphemistically call it. When you bribe or use money to distort elections, you will come up with an election outcome, which is cosmetic democracy. And cosmetic democracy will not take this country very far. But much more so, it will delegitimize the government and the state in power. And when the government is not legitimate, but most people came into office through use of money, then the state is weak. And when the state is weak, even crimes can happen, and they will not be solved just because the state is weak. And that is the mother of corruption. And in this case, use of money during elections is what we call political corruption. Now, political corruption is the mother of financial corruption, because the whole system now becomes systemic. That if somebody can bribe and come into office, whether as an MP or councillor or president, can use money to come into office through that political corruption, then you can as well practice the financial corruption, since it has become a norm. So it is a new norm since 1996 that you use money and you find the public does not shun it. So we need to do something about this one and not just dismiss it. Or if we want to dismiss it, as Honorable Dombo was saying, let's not practice liberal democracy, because the pretending is worse than the financial corruption. Don't pretend that you are practicing liberal democracy. Let us have liberal democracy then, and we know that so and so is coming into office just because he's selected. But for you to go and pretend that we are in a liberal democracy, but you are doing the opposite, is actually to undermine democracy, undermine development, and undermine good governance. Would rather have no liberal democracy and have good governance, because you can have some good governance without elections. But continue pretending, this pretense we put up, that there are no bribes, when actually we are calling it facilitation, euphemistically, that we are facilitating voters to go and eat or do this and that, is very, very unfortunate. But let me stop here so that I hear some other contributions. I will come in later. Back to you, Chairman.
Thank you so much, Professor. Very interesting perspective. Of course, there have been progressive voices that are pushing for us to redefine the kind of democracy that works for Africa. And I've also had some people define how we should be engaging in an electoral process, that we customize it to the current needs and challenges of the country at the time we are in. But without necessarily taking that direction, I want to bring in here Dr. Emily. You've had your fellow professor and the previous speakers lay a case, but help us here, because in all this, there's a question which I want you to also jump in and demystify. The argument that somehow money tends to turn citizens into inhabitants within an electoral process. You see, there's that, am I a citizen? Am I an inhabitant? A citizen is that someone probably who exercises the citizen right, compared to an inhabitant who just exists within a confined geographical space. And there is that narrative that somehow money turns citizens into inhabitants within an electoral process. What are your thoughts on this one?
Thank you very much. I have had my professor talk very passionately, as he always does, and that's very interesting. Of course, he places the use of money in from 1996 and onwards. And my own take is that we have always used money in elections, because even during the individual merit time, the no party time as we knew it, the NRM was facilitating people to contest as members of parliament. And we know, from literature at least, we do know that that kind of facilitation was happening. Now, we have to always recognize that elections happen within a context. And in our context, the cost of elections, the cost of politics has been going up. As you see it. And it's not actually just in Uganda. I think my first interaction with how much money actually plays part in an election was in 2013, when I was based in Nairobi, and the Uhuru Kenyatta and Ruth were campaigning, and Raila was campaigning. And that was when I saw what money does in an electoral process, that you actually have to use vast amounts of money to reach the voters, and you have to mobilize voters. Yes, and you have to mobilize voters, and these voters are located somewhere, and you have to find them. Mobilization of voters is an expensive thing. We have to recognize that. However, in our case, what has become problematic is that we are not just using money to mobilize voters so that they can hear us out. We are using money to buy out votes. And that is the thing that becomes very, very problematic. And we should try and understand, why do voters actually willingly allow to be bought? Or maybe not, I would say willingly. Why is it that they give their consent based on the money they have been given? And again, the whole point is, we can actually debate the extent to which people actually vote on the basis of money that they have been given. Because like I started by saying, there are very many complex, interrelationships between the various factors. In fact, in my earlier research on elections in the early 2000s, I thought that patronage played a much bigger role than even money did in terms of controlling consent. And that patronage did not necessarily come in form of money all the time. It did come in form of, giving jobs for people, giving whatever. It had a wide variety of ways that it manifested. So the kind of, we also have to appreciate the kind of competition we are saying has been increased during the multi-party time. It's actually not so much competition with outside the NRM. If you observe very carefully, most times the highest competition is to gain an NRM seat. And most times it is because it is one way of having access to the resources that then allows you to get to the voters. So our understanding of, even who is in what party and why their motivation for being in that party is very crucial for our reorganization of the ideas of what actually works in terms of solutions. Because even if, like Professor says, we have to make tough laws, who is going to make the laws? We are assuming that the laws are going to be made by people who actually want a clean electoral process, who actually want a straightforward, transparent process, so that the best person for the job wins the election. I think that there are many things that have gone wrong with our electoral process. Money is just one of them. And the main things are the nature of the institutions that we have to depend on in order to run an election. The other thing is, the way that the institution of local governments actually work and their relationship with the state, and many other things. And the consequence of all this is that, because your question is, does it make you a refugee? What's the word, a refugee or a citizen?
An inhabitant.
an inhabitant, or the consequence, of course, of having money drive the political process is that a lot of people are going to be excluded. I think that there are many more capable people, both men and women, who get excluded out of the electoral process because of the vast amounts of money that is needed for them to be able to participate. So that makes the public contestation very flawed, because it only allows a small minority, a small group of people who have access to such resources. And we may not even necessarily talk about exclusion of women and youth, as most people tend to say, because there are certain women and youth who have access through their networks to these kinds of resources. So essentially, you're having what is becoming a kind of class exclusion, because you're excluding those that do not actually have access to that resource. So the competition we are talking about, which has increased within the multi-party system, is largely the competition to join the NRM and ensure that your political career is actually secured by having the party pay for it. And there's a lot of money that the party can actually pay in order for you to participate. I have heard stories of people saying that they were being offered to be bought off so that they can let they are being offered a job or something so that you step down. We've seen people step down from electoral processes so that they allow a particular person contest and they've been offered a job thereafter. So it's that large system of patronage that actually we should be worried about more than the money itself, because the money itself is in some cases needed. I think the person from National Unity Platform put it well, that you need money to do this job. His only departure is that it must come from the people. but ultimately, if you're going to campaign at different levels, of course, if you're going to campaign for a presidential position, you're going to have to go to all parts of this country. And how are you going to do that without money? If you're going to campaign for a woman member of parliament seat, and you are a teacher, you have been a teacher, and you have aspirations of going to represent your people in parliament, how are you going to do that? You've been earning 300,000, and then suddenly you have to walk through the whole district, not even just one constituency. It requires money to do that. So at the end of the day, really, political mobilization is expensive, yes, and there are other factors that are also making this political competition very exclusive, favoring just a certain group of people. And also it's making the vast majority of citizens actually willing to take money for the sake of giving a vote in some way. And I think I like the way Mr. Dombo, Honorable Dombo, started by saying that, these people are hungry. They need what they need. And so they have reasons for allowing their votes to be poured. And that is what is more problematic.
Thank you. And this is where I bring in Emmanuel Dombo. You had the submissions. I know you'll have a comment on one or two, but as you comment on those submissions from the previous speakers, also help me and help the viewers out there, all listeners, to appreciate and understand if the tools used to control voter consent are the same across gender and demographics. The reason why I'm raising this question is because you have been a contestant before, and now you're also you're playing a role within the NRM party, and from your perspectives and experience, are these tools the same that are used to control consent across gender and across demographics?
Well, I thank you very much because of what my other colleagues have said. You see, in a panelist a discussion or a panel discussion like this one, in most cases, we don't come to defend political views, because I have many political views by the NRM. But we come to give a discussion so that the listeners can benefit from the experience that we have been in, irrespective of what political thoughts that we may hold.
Sure.
Therefore, I want to tell my brother from the National Unity Platform that even when he believes that they passed, I know that NUP failed to raise candidates in the biggest part of the country. So in areas where you couldn't get a candidate, where would the voters come from? So he can continue believing that they won, but there is an elaborate system. The same electoral commission which declared the NUP members who passed, it is the same electoral commission that declared the president of Uganda and even the other local leaders in NUP who passed. Why is it that in Uganda NUP performed it like that? Was it a different electoral commission? Then for my brother Devesa, I think he thought when you asked me to contextualize our debate, I was not justifying that because people may be poor, therefore they can take money during elections. I was just telling you the state of Africans.
The reality.
And I want to tell you that this is the liberal democracy. It's a foreign animal. It requires certain conditions in order for it to work well. That is why I gave an example of a country like China, where they have both election and selection, and you see the progress China has made. I asked, in NRM, democracy is one of our foundations, but I have asked you that how many countries have developed in Africa or anywhere out of democracy? And also the fact I want participants to know is that democracy is a discriminative process. First of all, you say only those above 18 are going to vote. How about those below 18? Can they make a decision? You say those ones with the HSC can contest for leadership. But we have had many leaders who have not been to school and they have done a good job. But the democratic process has already discriminated those. Therefore, the introduction of money and the nomination fees is a part of that discrimination, which is brought in by the nature of democracy. It goes on determining who does what and does what where. So one of the things that we must do to defeat monetization of elections is to ensure that we progressively do enough civic education. When you go to Western Uganda, when you look at the quality of leaders being elected in the whole of the country, and you look at Western Uganda, even when they will use money, they will not elect any kwara individual because of their civic information is progressively getting an informed voter. With education, with universal secondary education, universal primary education in Uganda, it will ensure that progressively the voters will be able to make an informed decision. That even when you come with money, it may not be possible to do that. Recently, a NUP candidate was elected in Makerere. Do you think people couldn't use money to prevent the Makerere people from voting the NUP person? But it's because even if we brought money in Makerere, the audience in Makerere is more informed. They know the challenges they're dealing with, and they know whom they want to vote. I contested as a guild president in Makerere University, and I was elected. I was a very poor student from a very poor background. But the university students, because of education, were able to listen, excuse me, and find out the type of leader they wanted. So in Uganda also, the thing that will undermine and prevent the voters from being manipulated because of use of money will be improving their education and improving the civic competences of the population. once the population is informed, people will come up with lies and they will not be voted. Right now, the loop wave was built on lies. The loop wave was built on the media and given a lot of lies. If I brought you the speeches of all members of parliament up to today, those who got the radios, they got misleading their voters, using the ignorance of the population to manipulate them in order to get their consent. So using manipulation of the voters has never been anything right. But now going to the reality. The reality is that use of money is necessary. First of all, like my sister asked, if he wanted to contest as a president, I will ask my brother from Nuuk how much my brother Chagulanyi used when he traversed the whole of Uganda. Can anybody manage it? Honorable Mao tried and he couldn't cover the whole country. In many areas, he could not address the rallies because he couldn't manage. One of the complaints they have against NRM is because of incumbency. The law is very clear, it protects the president to use the facilities that he would ordinarily use when he's in office as a president. And this has enabled the president to use the state facilities, but legally, because it's provided for by the law. And this is one of the complaints his opponents keep complaining about. But it's the same thing with the incumbents. Right now, Nuuk has many incumbents. And they will use the facilities that they ordinarily use when they're in parliament during the time when they go for re-election. So, use of money is very necessary, but also the deliberate manipulation of the voters by the people who are looking for votes. Because we are dealing with an ignorant population, it is something that must be either outlawed or progressively we modify the democracy so that we get the quality of democracy that we need. Otherwise, money is necessary, but we are still a peasant economy. We are dealing with very poor population. And in order for democracy to suffice, there are certain conditions that must be established. The Europe, we are no longer in the middle income, they are all across the middle income countries. They are all developed members of the society. They are all educated. They cannot be manipulated. Until Africa, including Uganda, we have educated our people to that level, then we cannot rule out the desire by those who want to get into leadership from using any means, including force, including money, including deceit, in order for them to gain elections or be elected. In my discussion, I'm not talking as an NRM, I'm speaking as a Ugandan, so that we contextualize the challenges we have and we find out how best we can find the solutions.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel, for really trying to steer this clear that the contributions or the conversation should firstly be all about Uganda, then less of our sentiments. But I know at some point people draw their sentiments from the parties they belong to. I'm going to bring in here, Professor is telling me that he's having a battery running low. So so I'm going to bring you in after Professor. So let me, at this point, Professor, are you there? You wanted to make a contribution?
Yes, I am there and I think you can hear me.
I can hear you. Please come in and make a contribution before your battery runs out, then I can bring in Wi-Fi after.
Thank you, thank you. Let me just come up with some brief rejoinders to my colleagues there. First, my sister is talking about political patronage. I do agree with you that political patronage also manufactures consent, because the whole of these, there are very many factors that end up manufacturing the consent of the population. But I think the topic for today is commercialization, because if we were talking about other factors, actually, in my opinion, the worst worse than the use of money is militarization. Militarization of electoral competition distorts election outcomes, because when you militarize, I heard my friend Dombo saying that some NUP didn't have candidates in certain areas, but certain areas had become militarized zones. And for example, the NUP presidential candidate could not go there and campaign. And wherever he would go to certain radio stations or TV stations, RDCs would switch off. And therefore, if you don't allow people to reach everywhere, because you are arresting them, you militarize the whole political space, then that also distorts election outcomes. So the issue here for today is commercialization. There are very many other factors that do distort election outcomes and manufacture consent. I will give a wider context. People have been talking about giving context. Let me give a wider context beyond Uganda. You would hear people like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein or this man of Egypt, who was he, getting, or our friend in Zimbabwe, somebody getting 90% consent from the population. In the same year, when next year he's overthrown, and 90% of the people are celebrating his going away. How can people this year give you a consent of 90% and the following year you get 0% of the consent? That means that that consent was actually manufactured. It is just cosmetic. It is not real consent. But coming back at the question of commercialization, I think we need to address it. Definitely, as my friend Dombo was saying, that like in Makerere, you may not easily read, but we are talking about graduates. How many graduates are in the country? If we are going to wait for Uganda to have 80% of the voters to be graduates, then you had better postpone elections for the next 100 years. So we have to do something about it. We are talking about the use of money, that it has, that when people are poor, therefore money will have to be used. I want to put it to him and the listeners out there that from what I have read and what I saw in the 1980s, in 1961 elections, and 1962 and 1980 elections, although there were other challenges like violence and whatever, and other vote rigging methods, there was no use of money to induce the voting pattern. There was no money used. So one cannot tell me that by then, the money was not used. So money, the use of money comes from above. It doesn't come from below. It comes from above and then induces the other people from below. Even when people have not asked for it, they know that people have come and they are going to pay. They actually pay before they are
Hello, is there an interruption? I can no longer hear.
Yeah, I think Professor has lost connection. We've lost Professor, and we're still making very interesting submissions. When he comes back, we'll bring him. We'll make him jump in and conclude his submission. But we've already used an hour, and the discussions are getting more interesting. Let me bring in here Alex. Alex, you've had the contribution. I have this question, which ideally I had prepared for Emmanuel, but let me throw it to you. Is it possible if we remove money from the picture? Can we then say that somehow we've worked towards leveling the playing field or equalizing the conditions for electoral competition?
I thank you. It is a very fundamental question to the processes of democracy, but I'll quickly want to react to the following. One, I have had my senior brother Dombo allude to the fact that we did not have candidates, and I want to put it to him that we actually had 245 nominated candidates for the legislature. The reason we were affected on many other places that we didn't have candidates, one, many of our candidates were stopped from participating in those processes. I mean, we are not living in oblivion and in Skyron. You know, all of you, what was done. Emmanuel Dombo comes from Eastern Uganda. She knows what the current Deputy Speaker of Parliament did. I believe she's in Parliament illegally. She used the bribery, she used the money, and this is in public domain. She bribed people out of the races. She used the militarization, high-level militarization of instilling fear and instigating anarchy in her region so as to come to parliament. So when you're discussing about presidential, parliamentary, and local government elections, it is important to understand that these are independent elections of each other. You cannot use the same yardstick of measure of a parliamentary election and the local government election and the presidential election. That will be totally foolhardy. Let me put it further to light. At the level of the presidential election and at the level of the parliamentary election, for example, in Eastern Uganda, in Busoga, Kyagulanyi is the president-elect of the people of Busoga. He won Busoga squarely, unprecedentedly. And the members of parliament there only have one, and that is Yeri. But we also know that the state was at it using the system of the military, because the bribery, the accountability issues of whatever you hear in elections is done by the state. And this is why it is important for the state to have culpability and liability. You know, when you listen to Honorable Dombo say, he is painting a rosy picture of the use of money. You all remember, ladies and gentlemen on this panel, what happened when the Honorable Janet Mukwaya got an accident towards Mukono. She was with starches of money in billions. I want to tell you that in 2010, I was close to one friend of mine. The public knows this friend of mine, so I'm not going to defining his processes. And the president of Uganda then, Tibuhaburwa, sent him over 200 million shillings for an electoral process of winning an internal mechanism of an interim primary. Now, one would run away from understanding these facts, that when you talk about democracy being discriminative, Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, you are taking society to be gullible to lies, and you just said that it is wrong when people start benchmarking leadership and service delivery on deceit. You castigated the NUP, but you have been the custodians of deceit for the last 35 years, my brother. Let me tell you, when you talk about discriminative democracy, in the recent case, in the recent Court of Appeal case, in the recent and Supreme Court case, the matter of age limits as inscribed in Article 105 of the Constitution, that you people changed very well. You know that you discussed the issue of discrimination, and that was at the issue of age. The reason we remained actually with a cap of 18 years was simple, because one is assumed to be an adult after that person has made the age of 18. Otherwise, these guys were ready to even scrap it away. Now, they remained with what benefits them. For example, curtailing candidates from nominating. You talk about NUP not having candidates. My brother, the NRM, we were a new party. We did not have funds to facilitate our candidates. That is a fact. And we were living on what was coming from the society because we are people power. That demystified.
So if had money, would have the candidates across?
Now, one, if you're curing the problem, don't look at what has been made as safeguards of having a ruling oligarchy remain in power and it entirely revolved into a dynasty. Because one, he is using a wrong example of Western Uganda. In Western Uganda, a vote is at 50,000. And that explains why those you think that they are the best. They are not the riffraff. No, they are not. They are actually the political riffraffs of reality. but they are only the class that can afford very expensively to run a campaign. In Western Uganda, Mbarara, Ntungam, I have interacted across the board, and Emmanuel Dombo knows it. A vote goes for 50,000. Let me tell you, there is an example of that very recent election where you had a minister and a former employee of the Uganda, a former corrupt, renowned employee of the Uganda Revenue Authority. You know what happened in that place? The minister Elioda and now the current NRM member of parliament, how much money was used in that constituency where they bought them knickers. Now, people who are being bought knickers, you are putting them at the pedigree of being the cornerstone and yardstick of our judgment. I think that is not right. It speaks to the core. If you're talking about discriminative democracy, then the state does it and benefits from it because it gives it longevity and existentiality with anarchy. They create laws that favor them. One, I have told you, my brother, even you hosting us today can fail to raise 3 million shillings for a nomination because you're not going, if I'm paying 3 million, what is our minimum wage in Uganda? What is our minimum wage? Because if you're determining every figure that is participatory of people, democracy is for the people, by the people, of the people. That is the simple, logical definition. It is known by everybody. It is simple. It is the people. You can't define democracy without inserting the word people because it speaks to the core of governance and well-being of societies. Now, the well-being of societies cannot be determined by the financial muscle of an individual or the military attachment of an individual, as Professor Ndebesa was saying. So for me, I wanted to tell my brother that one, NUP is not a wave. That is why it is still here. If it is a wave, I'm yet to understand waves that pass and never stop being around. You are discussing with the deputy spokesperson of the National Unity Platform. And as you have ably said, we were simply a generation that rose up to defeat deceit. And we defeated deceit squarely. Now it is, as I said, you tried to say the same electoral commission. In Nigeria, I never saw the Amukama speak what he spoke at Nambole. You all know that he was reading results he was not aware of. So these elections, Mr. Dombo, the presidential election is independent despite them being held on the same day because you understand the principle and the doctrine of separation of powers. This speaks to the core that leave this mafia state government that you are running, Mr. Dombo, where the institutions of government do not even work in tandem, but they are only being policed by the executive and in particular the president. Today, the president is calling people at State House. I've seen a tweet, I think you saw it. The wife is calling them in Kololo. The brother is calling them in Gulu. And then you have the son calling them at Jack and Drew. So if you are having that as a system that is being grown for the society,
and others are going to migrate.
He has ably said, and which is also okay. Now, I want to contextualize when you think that the National Unity Platform manipulated voters on deceit. You censored us in the press, therefore we did not benefit anything in the media. You did not allow us to move in the country, starting from July when we had intentions of going for consultative meetings. Now, today the packaging is more about money. And you took me to a very important question. And the question was, if money is removed from the picture, will the ground be leveled? My brother, I want to tell you, it will not leveled under the national resistance movement. Why? First of all, they're the custodians of using money. Every time we leave an election, my brother, do you know that the government of Uganda and the Bank of Uganda, inclusive of the governor, they have to come up with statements to align with what has been siphoned out of the treasury. Every election, and that one, I can later on give you even the figures, the scientific figures that have come out. When we finished the 2016 general election, there was advice on a government expenditure by the Governor Bank of Uganda, we all remember. But much of this money had been crookedly siphoned for the benefit of the presidential election. When you look at the militarization of democracy, I am speaking to you today, I am not sure the fate of my life tomorrow. And how do I say this? Because many of my colleagues have gone through the same path. They are breathing today, they are not breathing tomorrow. The National Unity Platform, I am speaking from our offices in Kamocha, and if just you gave me a minute, I will take you to the montage of those that have died in the line of seeking for equality, for freedom. So it is beyond money, because we are now under a regime that is evolving towards creating itself into a dynasty, and that is specifically to the Ugandan perspective. Now, it should be a process of Ugandans to realize that when you're faced with a dictatorship, you do not fight the symptoms that come, because every time you'll have different symptoms. Today we are discussing the issue of money, and I believe the purpose of why we are having it as a very great discussion is to enjoin and enlighten more of the societies that do not benefit from the exposure of understanding how devilish it is to fight, to use discriminative democracy using finances. Dombo was a guild president of Makerere University. He was also a member of parliament. And at the time when he was elected, he will tell you that he was not as rich as he is today. They were paying close to about 200,000 nomination fees. And I think before then, it was even lesser. But we managed to get a person of his capacity. I am one of those who were very proud when I was still young to listen to that gentleman called the Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, especially at the time when he even went further and took a step to censor a minister. Now, that record that he held then, I'm not certain, I don't want to speak for now, because he is part of a group that is trying to create a dynasty. I always get defeated on that. Why people like my brother would really get involved in creation of a dynasty, given the historical and cultural background that we come from the East. Now, if we want to arrest, because General Museveni, we must not run away from what has been historical. He said that the greatest problem of Africa is leaders who overstay in power. Because when you overstay
when not elected,
without
that
election.
is a new, my brother, that is a new input. That is a new input, and do not be. I have read General Museveni's book in the mustard seed. Okay, what happens at the age of 75 when going mad? Because Emmanuel Dombo talked about the seed. He's on record. He said a person at 75 scientifically. And he said that this had been given to him, the doctor scenarios of that time, that once one is above 75, then you have your mental faculty is deteriorating. And he even equally added that if you've been a hardworking person like him, because there are those who have not been hardworking and at 75, they are starting to work. But for him, he was in the bush since the 1960s, as he attests to it. He has been around for 60 years working. Now, when you understand him saying, then I'm not talking about the Museveni of today, because if the Museveni of 1980 met the Museveni of 2023 without roads, without hospitals, with the highest levels of corruption, because corruption is a big factor why the ground is not leveled. I can tell you, in Jinja, in the local government election of the mayor of Southern Division, and these are facts, you can cross-check them. The National Unity Platform gentleman won, and I don't mind about the court case, I will not mind about, but these are facts you all people can go ahead and look out for. The declaration result forms of the Electoral Commission indicate that he won, and the Electoral Commission accepts with their own declaration certified documents that he won. The tally sheet of the Electoral Commission declares him as winner. but the lady did not declare the National Unity Platform Badman as the candidate. They declared the NR candidate, Ashraf Muhammad, as the winner. After 3 days of collecting 90 boxes of the polling station, looking for results. Now, you're talking about corruption, and the question here, you said that will it create a playing field, and I said no. I'm telling you what happened in court. They have appointed the cadre judges now, just like Justice Kanyehamba told us about what happened in 26 when they were when there was a different ruling, and then thereafter judges had been influenced. You have all read that story. Now, in this case, the judge did not look at all on the merits. He went for a technicality, dismissed the matter, and the matter we have, of course, gone to the Court of Appeal. But even though we go to the Court of Appeal, I want you to understand that there is a collapse of institutions in Uganda. Now, whether you remove money, because that will also be very difficult when these people are working towards sanitizing the old man. And that is why our country is crumbling. So for the greatest responsibility of us and us, the elites, most importantly, we must, where do we want to be? This man is aged, he's gone. We have defeated him squarely, it's just the time. But we have these challenges they have left behind. Putting democracy to be democracy. Because let me tell you, there is nowhere in the world that is developed more than where there has been a democracy. Libya, there were no elections. There were no elections in Libya. But the freedom is something that is inborn, my brother Dombo. It is beyond even the infrastructure. We must look at, as the elite, we must look at taking on the trend of truth-telling. We must look at looking at the facts and knowing that we are benchmarking for the future of the next generations. We are not going to be around after 100 years. You don't have 100 years, my brother. But 100 years will exist with infrastructure that you left behind.
Okay, all right. I allow you more time because I nipped you in the bud when you're making your point. In the next 15 minutes, I'll be reading some of the comments coming through. You're also encouraged to send your questions to any of the panelists as we get this conversation going. Very interesting discussions here, and thank you. Emmanuel, I'm going to come back to you on a couple of things that our colleague Alex has raised. But let me first come to Dr. Emily. In the view of all these, first of all, there is a question here which I think still should be answered in context of the discussion concerning whether the tools used to control voter consent are the same across gender and demographics, or they are customized. For example, how do the political candidates deal with the women? How do they deal with the youth? It's important that you break down these dimensions when it comes to controlling voter consent.
Thank you very much. That's interesting. I listened with a lot of interest. I seem to hear him many other problems. Correct me if I'm wrong. And sometimes I think I need to go back to what Professor was saying, that today the topic is after all money. But the thing is, we cannot just discuss money in isolation of the other factors if we are talking about controlling consent. And that brings me to your question of whether the same tools are used across gender, across demographics, and so on. And I don't even know what these tools are, first of all. I don't know what these tools are that are used.
The use of money.
Well, I was coming to that, and I'll stick to what we are discussing today. money is used for everyone, because if I gave the example of a female teacher in some village who wants to become a member of parliament. How can they become? They will be given resources to join they will join the party that can support them, and that party will help them get where they are. And by the way, I think we are getting this notion that it is the poor who get controlled by money. And I think that's the wrong premise, because we have seen people with money who defend systems that are indefensible. What are they doing that for? And so it's not necessarily the case that it is poor people who get their votes bought. Votes are bought in different ways. And that's the reason I was bringing up patronage as well. Votes are bought in different ways. And so we can't just focus on the consent of the poor voter. They might be the majority, but the people who have resources also get their consent bought first of all, and they use those resources in turn to mobilize the others. So there's always, I have seen women who also have access to incredible resources, and they too control consent of other voters. So there's always something that one may not necessarily have to look at the demographics, but to look more generally that, how are we dealing with this? How is money actually controlling the electoral process? And for all intents and purposes, there are many ways that the cost of elections are driven up, because if you're and I agree with the person, with Alex, I think, saying that the presidential, parliamentary, and local government elections are different animals in our context. They really are. And what controls consent for each of those elections is quite different. But you cannot also understand how a party that does not have structures anywhere actually is the one saying that they must have won the election. There's always, there are things like how has our politics made it so costly for political parties to actually build political structures across the country. And that is where the issue of money comes in, because for you to be able to build political structures across the country, mobilize voters through the 5 years, you need money to do that. And there are already so many systems in place that prevents you from even building just political party structures throughout the time. And so we have weak organizational structures for parties. We have lack of resources for these parties to do anything fundamental. Most people laugh at these parties for not winning the election, but how are they supposed to win? With what in the end? So we need to be able to really look not just the vote buying at the vote buying itself, but who actually uses these vast amounts of money, and using what processes, using what structures, and in what magnitude. And only then can we understand how the consent of the voter ultimately gets controlled, not just by the direct buying of the vote throughout the process. So the demographics, the issues of gender, the issues of youth, as I said, the youth who have access to these resources, they also are in part of a network. They have these systems. They're the ones who will get the jobs, they're the ones who will get whatever, because they are part of the network system. And so those who don't have, those who have.
Wow, interesting. I'm coming to you, Emmanuel, to make your submission, but before I come to you, let me read a couple of comments coming through my screen here. Many of them they do agree that money is influencing elections and people being made beneficial. I think someone is referring to, I think Canon is referring to some of the government programs, how they are being used for political purposes. That's a comment coming through. And then there's another comment coming from John Superman, saying that many of the candidates say that it is the electorate that demand money from them and give So they further complain if they don't. Yes, usual action. When you talk to most of the political candidates, they will tell you how the behavior of the electorate is intolerable in terms of making these demands. Maybe we have to interrogate why do we have that attitude among the electorate towards their political candidates, elected leaders. Then there's another comment that is coming through from Costa, looking at how I think it was in agreement with Waiswa's argument concerning how the country should be, how we should become a democratized state. Then the last one which came from again, which talks about the collapse of institutions in Uganda is one of the biggest problems, and someone does augur well that this is probably his take home from the discussion. Please keep the comments coming through and the questions as well. I think I will have about 20 minutes to be able to handle some of those questions that may come through. But it's good that Professor Davis is back up. I have a question for you, Professor, but before you jump in, I'm bringing in here Emmanuel. Professor, first hold it there, and then bring Emmanuel here. Emmanuel Dombo, how, in view of everything, I know you've talked about the issue of sensitizing the electorate, but there are also voices that say some of the beneficiaries of being controlled in terms of their consent towards their voting patterns or decisions are not necessarily the poorest. So in practically from your perspective, what is the best way of sanitizing our electoral politics? How do we get out of this rabbit hole?
Thank you very much. And I want to thank the other panelists. As for my brother from Nuuk, we shall get another day to talk about the achievements of NRM, because I don't want it to divert the well-intended meaning of this discussion. But he knows he's himself a beneficiary and a product of the good work the National Resistance Movement has done. Honorable Chagulanyi, until NRM came to liberalize the arts industry, many arts people were not being seen in the world. But right now they can even aspire to be presidents of a country, and all that has been the contribution of the National Resistance Movement. And but we shall get another time to talk about the achievements. Let us talk about the role of money in voter consent. One time, I'll give you a story which was told to us by President Museveni. One time, he told us that if you don't limit the influence of foreign funders in the political system of the country, we shall be having challenges where the national agenda or the sovereignty of a country may be undermined because of the money we solicit from many people abroad or wherever the source may be. And because of that, therefore, in order to build the political capacity of the political parties in the country, NRM brought a law, the Political Parties Act, under which there was a provision for the parties to be funded by the state. I am aware that the National Unity Platform has so far signed for over 300 million from the Electoral Commission. And that money is enabling them to do the work they are doing now. And that is because the National Resistance Movement, under the wise counsel of His Excellency the President, saw it that the national parties of Uganda must be funded by the state when they have acquired a certain quota. This was discussed in the iPod. No matter whether our friends are they don't want to go to iPod, but at least they have signed for the money which was negotiated under the iPod. And this is what I'm telling you, that they are big beneficiaries of the process. And the process says, if we don't control money, the wealthy people will begin influencing. If you go to the United States of America, where there are very many big lobbies that influence the legislation in America, there are certain legislations that cannot pass on the floor. For instance, the control of use of arms or guns in the US has failed because of the strong lobby the National Rifle Association has over the members in the United States. Even here, when you see how the members of parliament are beginning to behave, right now there is a motion in parliament moved by the member of the National Unity Platform for the degazettement of a forest in Kayunga. Do you know how much money members have been paid?
This chair.
It is not going into details, but you'd wonder under what circumstances would a member of the Unity Platform who keeps saying that people power, moving a motion to degazette a forest so that the private people can sell the land to the sugarcane growers. Watch this space here on the floor of parliament and see how that motion eventually develops. But all this is the influence of money and the desire, the weaknesses in the human hearts of people to be manipulated in order perhaps to prepare for the next elections. I don't know where he took the money that he received, and but also the other problem that would come with the money would be the abuse of state resources. That is why, for us when we were in parliament, save for the president, where we restricted under what circumstances he would use the services that would accrue to him as the president, we said the people should not use the facilities of government like ministers in order to influence the outcome of the elections. There is even something worse that is eventually hanging around its head. And it's good recently the president had to come in to prevail over the individual security agencies who are either hired or manipulated in order to protect the interests of certain individuals. I have heard my brother Omunupu argue, because of security deployment, you deployed here. You mean you won in Uganda, but in Buganda because the NRM could not deploy there? NRM or the government deployed in order to create a playing field so that the National Unity Platform can win. You can see the outcome of the elections here because we deployed. If they wanted to overturn the results like they did in previous regimes, they would have done it. If really security and the forces, use of force was a factor. But you can see the deployment created stability and the people were able to exercise their will and they voted the people they wanted. So I want to assure my brother that for us, it is true, the use of money can be a barrier to new entrants. I want to tell you that I was in parliament when we passed the law to increase the nomination fees. Even us in the National Resistance Movement, our nomination fees for president is high. But leadership is not for everybody. There must be selective process in order to sieve. Otherwise, what would you do in a constituency when you have every person in the constituency bringing nomination papers because our laws allow independence to be? This can itself become a problem to the selection process or the campaign process. Finally, let me say this. To the people who aspire to become leaders, it is incumbent on everybody to ensure that one, apart from being good examples themselves, that they must abide by the law. There is no way somebody can call a press conference and give a notice that you are going to breach the law. And when the security subdues you, then you begin crying fraud. Because every action has consequences. And But I want to thank government that a lot of restraint was exercised, and the National Unity Platform, which was only 3 months or 2 months, managed to garner the numbers they garnered. This is because the Electoral Commission as a process works. The courts of laws, which my brother thinks that they could be manipulated. Recently, they upheld the elections of many NUPU candidates. Why? Because it is a process. But the other thing I want also to mention to people who are listening is that when you go to the United States of America, even President Trump is crying because he believes that's where democracy works best. But if you listen to President Trump and those who support him and the level of incitement of violence that happened there and the eventual death, you know that democracy is not a game for everybody, but also once there reaches, when there was incitement of the United States of America, policemen died, people died at the Capitol Hill. Even in Uganda, when there was violence in the elections, you know, you saw what happened. So it is the responsibility of everybody who participates in elections to do their due diligence. But the only way we can reverse this, we can do it through one legislation. We can put punitive legislation so that we prevent people from misbehaving and abusing the use of money. There is an amendment to the law which I thought would go a wrong way if it was introduced. For instance, when an election is mismanaged, the Electoral Commission is taken to court, but the presiding officers who are responsible are not. It is high time, because the presiding officer may eat money and declare a wrong person because of financial motivation. But then when they are taken to court, they take the Electoral Commission, which ends up at times paying a lot of money. So I want an amendment to the law so that it makes the presiding officer culpable for the conduct that he may have willingly and knowingly done, which subjects ridicule to the process of elections.
Thank you so much. Our time is fast spent. I have about 15 minutes before we can get out of here, so that leaves me space for about one question or two that have to be kept brief. Let me first bring in here, Professor. Professor Andresa, we lost you somehow when you were still trying to drive your point home. But let me pass through this question to you because it is big. I would love to be unfair if it's left unattended too. There is this whole notion around the securitization of politics or electoral politics. And you hinted about it, and also Alex hinted about it. But in places where we've seen some level of violence in the electoral process, we are also starting to see in those places that where there is a lot of violence, there is also equally too much use of money. So is it possible that securitizing an electoral process is becoming more of a fail-safe option, a standby generator for controlling voter consent?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please proceed.
Yeah, I am not sure that I got your question very well, but let me answer it like this. It's not a coincidence that where there is a lot of use of money, there might also be violence. I think it could be a result of the stakes being high. It implies that the stakes are very high in that constituency, and maybe the candidates are neck to neck, and therefore it is a do or die. And that explains why they have either to use money or to use violence. By the way, the use of money the way we are discussing, we seem to be saying that it is the use of money even in the general elections. In the by-elections, it is worse. There is a lot of use of money during the by-elections. In the primaries. A lot of money is used during primaries, and where the stakes are high, people actually sometimes spend more during primaries than in the general elections. So the cancer has spread even in primary schools and secondary schools. When people are competing for being a prefect, they are using money also. So it has become a culture, and it is not fault. Actually, to me, you, the organizers, you should not dwell so much on whether money controls consent or manufactures consent or what. Everybody is aware, even those who pretend that money is not being used. They know in the heart of their hearts that money is used. The issue should be addressing, looking for a solution to the use of money which controls consent, that distorts elections, that comes up with cosmetic democracy, and later on weakens the state. And when the state crumbles, people start asking themselves why the state has crumbled. The state has crumbled precisely because the consent was manufactured. This Afghanistan government had won elections, you remember? They had won elections, but they just broke up like no one's business because of this manufactured consent. That's why when regimes go in Africa, when they have previously won by 80–90%, people celebrate. Now, I heard my friend Dombo saying that the elections were free, they were not controlled in Uganda, for example, and that's, you know, most of the incumbents use some funny argument, you know. In 1980, where some people, including Dombo, if you were, I think he was old enough to hear what was going on. Obote used also to say, if we rig the elections, why didn't we rig it in Uganda? You remember Uganda was taken by DP. And he would go ahead and say, if you think we rigged the elections, why, that is replying to Museveni. They say, you Museveni, you lost in Nyabushozi. And Nyabushozi was won by Kutesa, who was DP. Why didn't we rig DP? To me, that is distorted reasoning. And I sometimes feel like not participating in such a reasoning. The issue is not that some region won or some people won. The issue is that everybody knows that we are using that money even in primaries. Does he want to tell us that there was no money used in primaries and they didn't distort elections and even lead to violence? But to answer your question, where there is violence, sometimes converging with use of money, it is that in such a constituency, the stakes are very high. And you find sometimes both of them have a lot of money or have a lot of support, and therefore they were neck to neck. But finally, I would like to say that we need to have, like, say, a parliamentary probe and a parliamentary report. That is if it will be discussed. Because of violence, there was a parliamentary report, a probe, and a report about electoral violence. It has never surfaced anywhere on the plenary to be discussed. But I would also suggest that there should be such a commission of inquiry or a parliamentary report about use of money commercializing elections, and we look for solutions. We could even come up with a mixed electoral system. If we can suggest some ways and means of reducing the use of money. Otherwise, the use of money has distorted the elections in Uganda, and by extension has distorted the democracy, and by extension has weakened the state, and by extension has delegitimized the state, and by extension, we are going to have one day, we shall have a failed state in Uganda because of lack of state legitimacy arising out of distorted elections that lead to cosmetic democracy.
Thank you so much, Professor. I'm only remaining with time for parting shots. So let me start with Dr. Emily. What are your parting shots? In 2 minutes.
Thank you very much. This has been a very interesting discussion. I like that at least we can give this conversation time, because our electoral process has issues, and they may not necessarily be attributed to one thing, but money is a big factor when we think about the cost of politics. And we should be thinking about how do we drive down the cost of doing politics, because if we don't drive down the cost of doing politics, then we are keeping the right thinking and the most capable people from politics. And that does not only include women and youth. It means that every right thinking Ugandan who could be interested in participating in politics will not do so because of the high cost of participating in politics. But also we need to not just drive the cost of doing politics down, but also try as much as possible to get people to actually enjoy the right to belong, to be able to support the political party that they can. If money plays a big part, it means that there are certain we are also undermining the growth of political parties. And for us to be a true democracy, we need to ensure that the playing field is leveled for people to belong to political parties that they wish to belong to. I don't mind if everybody wishes to belong in the NRM, provided there is fairness in how people are making those choices. So we need to make sure that there is no punishment of some kind because somebody wishes to belong to a different political party. And that's my parting shot.
Thank you so much. Very, very interesting perspective there. Let me come to Alex. Can you give us your parting shot? Can you please unmute your parting shot? Unmute parting shot in 2-3 minutes.
I will, and I will do quickly, but I'll respond firstly to what has been alluded to by Emmanuel Dombo. Now, I want first of all to tell him that there is no monopoly of consequence. The violence that was orchestrated by the regime on November 18th and November 19th, had quite big negative consequences across the board. There are members of the National Resistance Movement that were murdered on that day by the state. So it is wrong for any leader to assume that monopoly of that consequences have a monopoly. These cut across, and that is why we all yearn and believe we should have a better Uganda. The other issue that he has talked about, he has of course taken back the old style of the NRM, and that is characteristic of them, by talking about our MP who is trying to de-gazette. One, he did not give us the name. It still remains as hearsay, but I want to tell him that it is known the people who are stealing land and those who have brought the bad land policy at the NRM, headed by Nabakoba, who was refused by the population. The other issue that I want to close my remarks with is that, let me tell you, the listeners and the viewers, this is our country. This is our country, and this is our country that we must work for if we want it to change. It does not augur well to hide under the carpet, to come and have a cosmetic picture of where our country is going. I want to differ with Professor Ndebesa. For him, he says that the failed state is coming. Probably you are talking about that day when it will be an immediate effect. But we are already in a failed state. It all speaks for itself. Fuel now has gone to 4,600 petrol. Diesel is at 4,500 now.
But it is
gradual, but now, no, it is, my brother, when you're talking about economics, you always have to go back to where you're coming from. It is high in accordance to where? What is there? How much then is being asked those questions by his people down there? Here we are custodians of fuel in Bunyoro. Have you forgotten? Are you aware that it has been mismanaged? So if you want to take me there, I will give you other discussions for another day, as Honorable Emmanuel Doma said. We must look at our country as our country, and we must defeat the demon of monetarizing politics. Because after you have monetized, let me give you a last parting example. There is a member of parliament of the NRM, Singh Katongole. He gave money to voters. They did not vote for him. He called them to his premises and offered a corporal punishment because of using money. You know very well, Anita in Koboko withdrew her ambulance. She had monetarized and thought that people would always be materialistic. But I want to assure you, and I want to ask Ugandans, it is our responsibility to grow our country better and for the interest of our children and our children's children. That is people power, our power.
Thank you so much, Alex. Emmanuel, your parting shot.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank everybody and my brother. I am surprised that he's saying he doesn't know the member of parliament. When the parliament is here and he knows those who move the motion. I know.
I'm yet to know.
When things become painful, when the reality comes and presses people in the face, they begin running away from the truth. And he knows very well that this, yes, he's not aware deliberately because he knows that the people are not happy about what the member of parliament did. And he did it, he does it because, could be he spent a lot during elections, and now he's being influenced by the rich people in order, because he was paid money. And this is public knowledge. And could be that's a matter.
Can I give information?
A matter they will have to deal with in the.
No, Alex, hold your gun. It's time for Emmanuel to give the parting shot. Please proceed.
But I want to tell people, like, I would have loved I've been disappointed by Professor Ndelesa. One of the, he has been in the elections and got defeated. I would have loved in the elections and he couldn't make it. But also I would have loved to get the proposals. I have made proposals here. We make propositions, giving historical comparative analysis of Obote and the current regime is of no offensive value if we cannot make propositions to provide solutions for the current challenges. Money is good in elections because it is the blood for everything, but monetization of the elections in order to remove the ability of people to make judgment is not good. This will be overcome when we progressively educate our people and improve the civic competences of the population. I thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. Professor, in 1 minute, your parting shot.
My final take to this whole debate is that unless especially the government in power chooses to cut short this cancer, we shall not go very far because they are the ones who can now come up with, for example, a commission of inquiry into election irregularities, especially the use of money. They are the ones who can stop having supplementary budget just as we go for elections. They are the ones who can come up with a legislation to punish whoever gets involved in election irregularities and is proved by courts that he would not participate in any future elections. So the ball is in their court. But if they don't want to stop it and think that it is normal, it is because people are poor, it is because it is used even in America, it is, and trying to justify it one way or the other, and finally saying that is facilitation allowance when somebody has used 10,000 shillings to go to your office and you give him a transport allowance of 500,000 or 10 million, and you think that is not bribery, then I don't know, I have failed in my English. But otherwise, if there was a much effort put into it, we would reduce it. We cannot eliminate it, but we would reduce it. But I think there is no political goodwill. Once there is, it can be reduced. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's a comment coming from Professor Emily. Let me read it as I conclude, that the real solution lies in rethinking our form of representation and giving political parties a chance to grow. Civic engagement and strengthening institutions of democracy are crucial. And there is need to empower institutions to be functional. All right. Thank you so much to all our dear listeners, and thank you so much to our panelists that have been with us today. I had with me Professor Mwambi Sanderisa of Jonas Makerere University, College of Humanities and Social Sciences, and he's also an alumni with Kivu Hahura. I hope I pronounced that right.
What do you mean by that? I am not his contemporary. He was in the University of Dar es Salaam in 67. I was there in 87.
Oh.
You seem to be implying as if we were there together. We have a difference of 20 years.
But is your hobby at the university?
Yes, that is true. That is true.
It's a good fact to present. And then I also had with me Professor Emily Comfort, who is a researcher, policy analyst, and a journalist as well, and he's currently the director of Africa Policy Center at UCU, Uganda Teachers University. Thank you for being part of the discussion. I also had with me Emmanuel Maladrombo, who is the current director of communications at the NRM Secretariat. Speaks for the NRM party. It's very, very good pleasure to have you and being part of the discussion. And lastly, I add Alex Waiswa Kumbiro, who is also the deputy spokesperson for the National Unity Platform. It's been a very great conversation and discussion. Thank you for your candid insights and contributions to this discussion. We can continue with this conversation on our social media platforms. Time check is exactly 4, and allow me to end it here. I remain Felix Kafuma, moderator. Till the next edition of our discussions on money and politics. Bye bye. Take care.